Spiritual energy is everywhere. It is woven into the fabric of existence. You go to a movie, and what do you see? A movie, of course. But watch the people, not the movie. Watch the people. Put on your see-in-the-dark, perception-enhancing glasses. Watch the people. And what will you see? You might see people's eyes watering, tears falling down their cheeks, their fingers wiping away the tears. You might see people with clenched teeth, gripping the edges of their seats. You may even be able to hear their hearts rapidly beating and smell their sweat. You will hear people laughing, or gasping, or cheering, or sniffling and sobbing. You may even see people reaching out to comfort one another. The reactions that you see in people watching a movie are signs of spiritual energy. They are physiological reactions as well as emotions and feelings and insights. And these reactions are conjured from images projected onto a movie theater screen? How weird is that? Yet, people's lives are changed in movie theaters. Why? For no other reason than imagination. Thinking and imagining can change people's lives. A person can walk out of a movie theater a changed person with a fresh outlook on life. Then there is the cat. A cat, when it is born, cannot see unless it is exposed to light within a certain time frame after its birth. If the cat is not exposed to light within that time frame, the cat will be blind from birth. In other words, to a kitten newly born, light is kind of like spiritual energy. Light evokes in the kitten a learning experience that changes its life from that time forward. With light, the world of the kitten becomes a world of images associated with smells, bodily sensations, and sounds. I know this is a stretch, but bear with me. Because then there is Helen Keller. She became deaf and lost her sense of sight due to illness at an early age before she had acquired the ability to speak. She did not learn language until years later, when it was taught to her by her friend, teacher, and lifelong companion, Anne Sullivan. The acquisition of language was to Helen Keller a kind of spiritual energy. It opened her imagination to new experiences and fresh insights that in turn provoked more new experiences, more new relationships, more new imaginings, and fresh ideas. Helen Keller's experiences learning language inspired her to write 14 books and hundreds of essays and speeches. She became a disability rights activist and lived a full life to the age of 87. What light is to a kitten born in darkness, Anne Sullivan was to Helen Keller. Anne Sullivan taught Helen Keller language by repetition. It is by inference, by repetition, that people acquire a particular language. Humans probably do have some sort of genetic programming that gives them the aptitude to acquire language, but it is experience, inference, repetition that enables a person to acquire a particular language, English, American English, in the case of Helen Keller. And so it is with the cat. In order to achieve sight, the kitten needs to be exposed to light at a certain stage of its early life development. With light, the kitten's brain is able to make inferences needed to correlate its sense of touch and taste and smell to the images that it can see only in light. This correlation process is inference. It's not deduction, it's inference, induction. It is insight about experience from experience. Consciousness is the term I would like to use to describe the change that happened to Helen Keller when she acquired language. Consciousness is also the term I would like to apply to the cat when the cat was exposed to light and acquired sight. Helen Keller became conscious of language. The cat began a lifelong journey of interpreting the language of shadows and colors and shapes. So, as I've described it here, consciousness is not all that exotic. In fact, it's pretty fundamental to being alive. The cat is conscious, and so is Helen Keller. There is an idea out there that only humans are conscious, that animals are basically machines. That idea, that misconception developed in times past when people had no experience with thinking machines. We now live in a world populated by all sorts of thinking machines. Cell phones, especially smartphones, are thinking machines. Internet search engines are thinking machines. Even bureaucracies and corporations are thinking machines. But machines aren't alive. They're not conscious. They can think, but it doesn't matter that a thinking machine is smarter than I am, that it can spell better than I can, that it can remember things better than I can, that it can perform calculations faster and more accurately than I can, that it can follow grammar rules more closely than I do. Thinking does not make a machine conscious. It does not make a machine alive. We love our cell phones, but we don't love them like we love our cats. We have a spiritual affinity with cats, dogs, and other animals. We don't have that affinity with machines. We see in our cats that same spiritual energy that we share with other living things, maybe all living things. That spiritual energy is exhibited when the cat plays with yarn or smells your hand or jumps into the basket filled with freshly washed clothes that are still warm from the dryer. Cats are curious. They are always exploring, learning, making inferences, and yes, even getting irritable and demanding and hard to control. Even though cats can't think as intelligently as machines, though they can't use our language like an AI machine can, cats are alive, machines are not, and we have an affinity for cats that we will probably never have for thinking machines. Spiritual energy, you see, is kind of like a fire that feeds on its own burning. Learning is like spiritual energy. Imagination is like spiritual energy. Consciousness is like spiritual energy, even though spiritual energy is, from the standpoint of thermodynamics, physically impossible as a perpetual motion machine. Life itself seems to exhibit an energy that is akin to spiritual energy. So far as I know, scientists have never been able to mix together raw chemicals and create life. Yet life is everywhere. It proliferates. It inhabits stagnant water, near freezing water, even water that is nearly boiling. It lives in dirt and on rocks. Maybe the missing ingredient that scientists need to make life in a test tube from a mixture of raw chemicals is spiritual energy. When spiritual energy enters the mixture of algorithms that govern a machine, strange things happen. Unexpected outcomes ensue. Take the stock market, for example. It is basically a score-keeping machine that uses money to keep score. Theoretically, it should provide an extremely accurate accounting of what companies in the stock market are actually worth. However, the people who invest in the stock market have hopes and dreams dreams, delusions, and obsessions. They have spiritual energy. And as a result, the stock market has bubbles and crashes. There are people who have managed to make fortunes in the stock market who are actually not that smart, who look like geniuses, but actually made their money only because of their magic 8 balls or their Ouija boards. So, let's suppose that the biblical account of creation is right, that the first thing God created is light, and that particular light was spiritual energy. And let's also suppose that certain physicists who are cosmologists are also right, that the universe began as a single point. Then God added spiritual energy to that single point, and wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. The Big Bang took place, and our ever-expanding universe was born. Where is that spiritual energy now? It's in the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. It's in the concept that light is both a particle and a wave. It's in the fundamental principle of quantum theory that subatomic particle behavior can only be described as probabilistic, not as mechanistic. In other words, subatomic particles behave like the stock market. When you add spiritual energy to any system that is fundamentally mechanical in nature, that system at best becomes a probabilistic system. And this is why you should not trust self-driving cars and trucks. If those vehicles were driving on highways and roads with other self-driving vehicles, the system might work. I say might. But you know who is driving the cars that don't drive themselves. It's your neighbors. It's that old lady with purple hair who is always forgetting to wear her dentures. It's that scrawny teenage boy high on methamphetamines who talks to himself and wants to be a race car driver. It is people who take their cell phones with them everywhere, and I mean everywhere, and the cell phones are always in front of their faces, and they are always poking them. It is people who exhibit road rage, not just on roads, but in places like supermarkets, drugstore counters, or teller machines. Love, conflict, addiction, rage, greed, self-esteem, coping with stress, and longing for social acceptance. These are the passions that drive the drivers who are driving our cars and trucks down our roads. Our modern road system is psycho-crazy with spiritual energy. Whatever you do, don't trust self-driving cars. Now, let's get back to God. The Bible says that God fashioned Adam, the first man, from clay, then breathed life into the man. That breath from God into Adam was spiritual energy. And everybody, all of Adam's children, even Elon Musk, even illegal immigrants, everybody who breathed from that time forward was alive. And life is an experience filled with spiritual energy. As I said earlier, I think it is possible that all of life has spiritual energy. Although the creation story in the Bible does not explicitly say as much, it is possible that God breathed spiritual energy into all living things. Machines, even thinking machines with artificial intelligence, are not hungry, nor do they thirst. Perhaps it is possible that when God created life, he put raw chemicals into a test tube, then breathed spiritual energy into that test tube, then suddenly, miraculously, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, those chemicals became life forms. They were alive, and they were hungry, and they were thirsty. All life forms, even those without mouths and lungs, take in nutrients and energy from their external environment. Even life forms that do not take in energy from the sun or do not eat other life forms. All life forms also procreate. When God said, as a blessing to Adam and Eve, "Be fruitful and multiply," he was perhaps repeating in a metaphorical way the same blessing that God gave the test tube of raw chemicals in which he breathed life. I say this because one of the fundamental characteristics of life forms, all life forms, is the ability to reproduce. The drive is manifest in flowers that bloom, peacocks that strut, insects that emit pheromones, and birds that sing mating calls. In our own lives, sex is a potent elixir that is the stuff of drama, comedy, and tragedy. In biology, procreation, sexual and non-sexual, is central to the understanding of all life forms. But to an artificial intelligence robot, sex means nothing, and robots aren't afraid to die. Why should they be? Robots are not alive. They don't have spiritual energy. And this is another reason that we should trust people instead of robots to drive our cars. Robots aren't afraid to die. But even your idiot neighbor, who you would never trust to care for your pets or water your plants, in a pinch, if you had to, you could trust him to drive your car. Why? Because he's afraid to die. And the fear of death, the desire to avoid pain, the attraction to pleasure, and aversion to danger may be another form of spiritual energy that is shared by all forms of life. Do pineapples fear death? What about slime molds or paramecium? How the heck should I know? But I do know this: lawnmowers do not fear death. Television sets do not fear death. Even AI self-driving cars do not fear death. All living things, at least the ones that we know about, the ones that are here on our planet Earth, have DNA. And viruses, which are not considered to be alive, also have DNA or RNA. One reason that viruses are not considered to be alive is that they cannot independently reproduce. They require a host to reproduce. And once they get a host, boy, do they reproduce. The viruses make copies of themselves with variations called mutations, which can latch onto new hosts over time. Over generations, the viruses evolve, and generations for a virus are fast, so viruses evolve rapidly. Evolution seems to be kind of like spiritual energy. Like God, who is spiritual energy, evolution seems to be endlessly creative, fostering new adaptations to different environments, promoting endless diversity. Like God, evolution seems to run counter to the basic laws of physics, particularly thermodynamics. Normally, especially in non-living systems, things fall apart, machines break down, institutions wear out and die. You, in your own life, have to constantly keep cleaning and repairing your house, and the various mechanical systems and structures that make up your house still keep breaking down, and your house still keeps getting messy. Everything, and I mean everything, eventually seems to fall apart. Evolution runs counter to the norm of things falling apart. It fosters living systems of greater complexity. It doesn't decompose things, it builds up better. It promotes those living systems that are most suitable to the environment in which they live. But unlike God, evolution is mechanical, not spiritual, and it is not capable of perpetual motion. It is not immortal. Evolution is a feature of an ongoing life and death process that burns energy and leaves behind fossils and bones and remnants of DNA. In living systems, a record of DNA that is no longer of any use is also left behind. Evolution is a pretty good housekeeper, but the house keeps getting messy. And eventually, due to the laws of thermodynamics, life itself will end. In the meantime, remember the blessing that God gave to Adam and Eve after He created them. Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Use your spiritual energy. That blessing was not just for Adam and Eve, but for all people who have ever lived and breathed. One of those people, Stephen Hawking, was one of the greatest geniuses of our time, or of any time. He was a man who was filled with imagination, with the intelligence to perform thought experiments and devise scientific theory that changed our understanding of the cosmos. Yet, he was a cripple. In his early 20s, he contracted a degenerative disease that took away his ability to walk and eventually even his ability to talk. But the man was alive with fresh insights into reality, with formulations that spoke to the underlying structure of the universe. His body was failing him, but the creative imagination that was his scientific work gave him new life and meaning. Even when he lost the use of his legs, he continued to attend scientific conferences and traveled widely. In the popular culture, he became a celebrity of sorts and even authored popular books about science. Toward the end of his life, when he lost his ability to speak with his mouth and voice and tongue, he continued to speak using a machine and a synthesized voice, and his words were important. When he contracted his disease in his early 20s, his life expectancy was dramatically shortened, but he defied expectations, and he lived to the age of 76. You also can possess and be possessed by that same spiritual energy that enlivened Stephen Hawking. You have imagination, you have self-awareness, and the wherewithal to make yourself a better self. If you find yourself filled with negative spiritual energy, that makes you obsessive and consumes you, then you need to die unto yourself and be born again, to become like a little child and embrace the world with all its beauty and diversity and even its ugliness, and fill your imagination with more imagination, your creativity with more creativity, your communication with deeper communication, your love with deeper love. Spiritual energy is a fire that feeds on its own burning, an energy that does not consume us, but gives us light and insight and new possibilities. Rest a while. Contemplate your circumstances. Let your body replenish and repair itself. Then reawaken, look around, and be born again to the miraculous possibilities to which you first were born.